the New York Knicks. We are the New York Knicks. Say go New York, go New York, go. Go New York, go New York, go. Say go New York, go New York, go. Go New York, go New York, go.
What's going on, Knicks fans? It's Josh Byrne, and you're listening to the Knicks Pod. And on today's episode, it's going to be a little bit of a shorter one. Connor is not with me today, but he will be right back here next week. But I wanted to get into two things that came out this week. Number one, Evan Fournier has voiced his displeasure. He has come out and he has told everyone about his experience last year from being a starter, from being one of the prominent players on this Knicks team, to really having no role and rotting on the bench. He told everyone about it in an interview, and he is ready to get out of New York. It is safe to say that. And also, Draymond Green came out and said that us Knicks fans are both delusional and miserable. So, do I agree with that? I'll get into that as well. But first off, I'd like to mention Evan Fournier's comments, because man, were they a doozy. Let's get right into this. Okay. So, talking about Tom Thibodeau last year and when he made that lineup change. Of course, the Knicks started out the season 9-13. Fans were miserable at that time, so Draymond Green is right about that. But once Tom Thibodeau made that change and went into the 9-man rotation, moved up Quentin Grimes on the roster, amongst other things, that's when things really started to turn and the gears got turning and everything kicked into high gear for the New York Knicks season after that point and going forward. And one of the casualties of that change, of that roster shakeup, was Evan Fournier really losing any kind of role whatsoever. So, talking about that experience, Evan Fournier said, when he took me out of the starting five, he just told me he was going to try something else. Kind of vague, not much there. Tom just goes up, he has Evan in his office, and it's just like, you're not going to be in the lineup anymore. I'm just trying something else. Little did Evan know that meant that he pretty much wasn't going to play the rest of the season. Evan goes on to say in the interview, then at the first game of a road trip, he announced to me that I was leaving the rotation, and ciao. So just like that, things are over. Now, look, I was a big proponent of limiting Evan Fournier's minutes because Evan, even though he is an established shooter and scorer in this league, it was clear that on the Knicks, he was just not adding enough value to this team. Because if Evan Fournier isn't catching the ball and shooting the ball and hitting his threes, what kind of value does this guy have? I know he's getting paid $18 million, but are you kidding me? He can't defend. He's Mr. Turnstile over there. Everyone just runs around him. And then he's not a big guy. He's not going to get you rebounds. He's not a playmaker. He provides nothing. He needs to be hitting his threes. And even though it was a small sample size last year, he was not hitting his threes like he was the year before. And frankly, even the year before, I think the general consensus amongst Knicks fans was that Evan Fournier was a disappointment, and he was one of the several reasons why the Knicks were disappointing in 2021 and failed to miss the playoffs. So, that being said, Evan continues to say, at first, when he was taken out of the lineup, yes, you want to spit on everyone. You have hatred. Derrick Rose and I looked at each other and said to each other, what the hell are we doing here? During the 5-on-5, we were on the side. Uncool times. And I realized that wouldn't change. I took things more slowly. I focused on me and didn't let the rest get to me anymore. Okay, it's kind of a lot to take. Essentially, he's saying, once he was out in the lineup, once he was watching the rest of his teammates do their thing, he was kind of done. Mentally, he just was out of it, and I can't really blame him there, especially considering the fact that the Knicks went on a run once he was taken out of the rotation. I know he played a couple games here and there. There were a couple times. I know he referenced after a game last year that it was like a one-night stand when he played a random game due to an injury. But outside of that, outside of here and there, Evan Fournier was he was chow. He was sayonara, baby, and Tom Thibodeau did not want him back. But here's my issue with that comment. Here is the main issue with Evan Fournier saying all this. It's not that he's trashing on the organization, okay? Because if anything, this makes it an easier decision if it wasn't an easy decision already to just trade him. Because let's face it, Evan Fournier, after saying this stuff, he is not coming back. You can argue that he deserves minutes and that he could add value to this team shooting and that sometimes the Knicks could use him for 10 to 15 minutes. But frankly, saying all this, I mean, after the way things with Obi Toppin ended, and we didn't even hear what things actually happened between Obi and Tom, but he got scooted out of here for a bag of chips. I mean, after Evan telling the entire media brigade all this stuff, there's no way he's coming back. But my main problem with this isn't any of that. It's the fact that he mentioned Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose, I understand he has a similar role on the Knicks last year. Derrick Rose was another casualty of that lineup shakeup, so I get it. They were both together the whole time. They probably were looking at each other and were like, damn, I wish we could be out there. What the hell are we doing? I get that. That makes perfect sense. But the problem with mentioning Derrick Rose is you're lumping him into this gruntled nature that you're spewing. You know, Evan's talking about not spewing hatred. Well, like it or not, Evan, the fact that you opened your mouth and said all this stuff is you spewing hatred. And that's fine. You're allowed to do that. You're an NBA player. You've proven to be a known commodity in the association and you want to get playing time. That's fair. But do not be putting words, do not be putting perceptions of experiences into somebody else's sphere. Look, for all we know, Derrick Rose was unhappy last year. Maybe he was upset that he wasn't getting any playing time. Or maybe he wasn't because Derrick Rose never made it known to the public how he felt or his unhappiness if he was unhappy. Derrick Rose was admirable in that he really took that whole change with a lot of pride, with a lot of humility, and I think that showed a lot in the Knicks locker room. And even though he wasn't able to add a lot of value on the court, I think Derrick Rose's maturity and his presence there in that locker room helped a lot of younger guys succeed. And a lot of those younger guys were the same guys who were plugged into the rotation and stepped into larger roles. Quentin Grimes, Emmanuel quickly really broke out. And I gotta think, and maybe I'm wrong, but I have to assume that Derrick Rose played a positive impact on those guys ascending last year. So Derrick Rose, he's not on the Knicks anymore. He got traded. Hopefully, for his sake, he gets some playing time here and there with the Grizzlies. But Evan Fournier has no right to be mentioning another player into his own experience, into his own unhappiness. Because that's just immature and that's not okay. And I'd be interested to know how Derrick Rose feels about that, because if I were him, I wouldn't be too happy about that, but maybe he doesn't care. Anyways, look, the bottom line is Evan Fournier as a Knick, it didn't work out the way we wanted it to. And when you look at this Knicks roster now, Evan Fournier really doesn't deserve to be ahead of the likes of Emmanuel Quickley, to be ahead of the likes of Quentin Grimes, even Miles McBride, because you know what all those three guys do? Besides the fact that they're younger and they're on way cheaper contracts, you know what they do? They play defense and they hustle. Evan Fournier is at a point in his career where you know what he is. He's a shooter. And if he's not making his shots, he ain't providing anything. He's 30 years old now. It's not like, suddenly overnight he's just going to become this lockdown perimeter and interior defender. He's not going to do that. He's a turnstile. He always will be a turnstile. But maybe he can continue being a productive NBA player if he can start hitting his threes. And again, it was a small sample size last year, so even though his shooting numbers were down, maybe that would have changed. Even if it did, I agree with Tom Thibodeau in making that lineup change. And that lineup change is what completely turned the season around, and it proved to me that the Knicks are really better off moving on from Evan Fournier. So, Evan Fournier deserves to have minutes and to be a player and a piece moving forward. Just not on the Knicks. He needs a change of scenery. I think for Evan, a great situation for him would be a rebuilding team where he can be a veteran leader. Although, frankly, looking at these comments, I'm not sure how much of a leader he actually is, but I do know that on a rebuilding team, he will get more minutes. He'll be able to put up a higher volume of shots. And hopefully he'll be able to make that contract worth it for somebody. And despite the fact that he wasn't able to show any value last year, and Evan Fournier did mention that throughout this interview, that, if they want to trade me, they should have played me. That's fair, but really at the end of the day, I don't think the Knicks would have gotten a lot for Evan either way, and I don't think they're going to get a lot for him now, but I do think that there will be some team that will take on his contract, and even if the Knicks don't get much, if anything at all, in return, I think this is a classic scenario of addition by subtraction. It just opens up the roster, it clears a black hole off the bench, and it gets a guy who's very unhappy with the organization outside of the organization. I think his days as a Knick are over, and I think that's for the best for both parties. Now, another podcast and another NBA player came out and spoke about the Knicks, but this time not exactly about the Knicks organization, but more so the fan base. I thought this was pretty interesting. Draymond Green basically came out. He did an interview. Trae Young was there. I don't know all the context to the situation. I couldn't tell you about the podcast, but I did see the clip that just about everybody else has seen, right? So he comes out and he says, Knicks fans are delusional and miserable. Okay, well, as salty as I was when I initially heard that, I'm not even going to lie, if you were to come up with 2 or 3 words to describe the Knicks fan base, delusional, miserable, 2 of the top choices right there. So, I don't think he's necessarily wrong, but right now, I think this is the least amount of delusion we're seeing, and this is the least amount of misery that we're seeing as Knicks fans and we're experiencing as Knicks fans, because I was born in 2000, I'm 22 years old, so I haven't seen many good Knicks years. I wasn't around for the 90s Knicks where they were making the playoffs every year and dominating during much of the regular season. I didn't see that. I saw the Isaiah Thomas Knicks. I saw the David Fizdale Knicks. I saw the Derek Fisher Knicks, the Phil Jackson, president of basketball operations Knicks. I've seen a lot of incompetence. That is what I am trying to tell you with a more long-winded answer than is necessary. And I'm not alone. Knicks fans over the past 20 plus years, we haven't seen a lot of good. So when you have a team that is right at the top of market value in the NBA, that has amongst the most fans of any team in the NBA, with that comes expectations, because when you have resources like the Knicks do, there are appropriate expectations. And unfortunately, the Knicks have been so incompetent, so out there, such a disaster year after year through these past 20 years, that they have not been able to put out a consistent contender. So yeah, for the most part, over the past 20 plus years, Draymond Green's right. We've been miserable, but we have every reason to be miserable over that time period. But things are changing. Knicks have made the playoffs 2 of the past 3 years. They have a mostly young roster, decent cap situation, a lot of trade assets. Things are looking up. And I gotta tell you, I'm not saying that this Knicks team is championship caliber, but there's no reason to think that the Knicks can't make the playoffs for at least the next 2 or 3 years consecutively. And if that does happen, combined with the fact that they live and play in New York City, in the Mecca, in the world's most famous arena, I'm not just making this stuff up, this is true, there is no reason to think the Knicks can't land a superstar. Does that make me delusional, Draymond Green? Because I think it makes a lot of sense. At some point or the other, the Knicks, if they prove and continue to prove that they are a maturing organization, that they are an organization that is getting back to respectability, then they will have a lineup of superstars waiting to come to New York. The reason why that has not happened, and why each offseason when Knicks fans are clamoring for a superstar and he doesn't show up, and we're labeled delusional, the reason why all that happens is because the Knicks are never competent and they never show any signs of competitiveness. But the tides are changing, folks. And the Knicks are dangerously close to breaking the door open for someone real good to come over here. Is it going to happen this offseason? Probably not. Odds are very low. Is it going to happen next offseason? Maybe. Probably like a 50-50 situation. But I do know this. If the Knicks go out this season and do what they did last year, At some point or the other, someone is going to come to the Knicks. Is it going to be Donovan Mitchell? Is it going to be Joel Embiid? I don't know. But someone with that tier of stardom is going to want to come to New York. And when that happens, Knicks fans will no longer be miserable. And if they think that they have a chance to win a championship, they will no longer be labeled delusional. Thanks for watching, folks. And as always, like and subscribe, Knicks fans, because you've been listening to the Knicks Pod.
We are the New York Knicks. We are the New York Knicks. They go New York.